Hey everybody. Well, I am back. It's been a while. Life, gets busy. Very, very busy summer and autumn, but I've been meaning to post something new for quite some time. So I'm going to try to do something today that I hope works for you, but works for me too, in that it's going to be a little quicker. I've been asked a lot to do this both in online and in live classes, but by do this, I mean talk about this subject, which is editing, simplification, how to make your paintings I'm hesitating to say it. Watercolor isn't always at its best when it's loose and free and unencumbered, but often it is. Often it is. It's certainly not the only way to paint in watercolor, but it's one of the most expressive ways. So yeah, I'm just hesitant to promote a way to do that, or frankly, to do anything. I think there are no shortage of ways to paint in watercolor or in any other medium you're interested in. But this is sort of an approach that I think is valid, where it's a little bit light on drawing and a little bit more of a celebration of the fluidity and looseness of the medium. So I'm a guy who loves to draw, and possibly too much. My more considered or time-consuming works are often characterized by the structure underneath, how much I tend to draw. I work it into my style. It's not a crutch. It's not an excuse, but it is a way I have. But I like to think I have other skills up my sleeve, and we'll try to do one for you today. Where in the world are we? We're in Florence, Italy. Beautiful Florence. One of the most painted places on earth. Venice probably beats it out, but Florence is no slouch. It is gorgeous, of course. For anybody who's been, it's unforgettable. Just a repository of much of the world's great art, architecture, and often accredited with being the home of perspective. Anyway, this is a view of the Arno, the river, the famous river in Florence, taken from a point of view not elevated as if you're in an airplane, but really there's the Piazzale Michelangelo, one of the hills that you can climb, and one of the most enjoyable things you can do is get up to the Piazza Michelangelo and look down on Florence spreading out below you. It's glorious. So this is, the point of view is accurate, but what I'm drawing is not especially accurate because I'm going to edit a lot. I'll show you a reference. Don't have much, but of course it's this glorious sunset view from the Piazzale Michelangelo, looking down on the Arno. The center stage, of course, is the glorious Ponte Vecchio from 1635, right around 1350, I believe. Ponte Vecchio, of course, means the old bridge, and it is one of the oldest structures. It's also a destination bridge, meaning there are lots of stores and shops and cubby holes. It's not just a means of getting across the river. It's a destination, a place to go, a place to be. I was fixated in college and far beyond by the idea of bridges as not only a means of movement or travel from point A to point B, but also as a destination in and of themselves. So what I'm going to try to do is just feature the Ponte Vecchio and a couple of little highlights. Venice is just riddled with iconic buildings and scenes. And in a way, that's what this painting is all about. By just highlighting a couple of them, I hope to honor the whole city in a way by not trying to draw everything. And not, for those of you who follow me at all, you know I am just not a big fan of reference photos. I think they're a good starting point, reference, but that's as far as they go. I think it's my job as an artist to try to move beyond them. They can give me something to think about or remind me of something that I'm already thinking about or have thought about. But again, I think it's my job to not be a camera, but to express as best I can my experiences of the world. So yeah, I'm going to be using a lot of editing, a lot of simplification. Again, this isn't the only way or the right or the wrong way to paint. It's a way. So I'm trying to talk and draw at the same time. I can do it, but I don't know if I'm doing it well. So what I'm really trying to do is police myself that I don't draw too much. I want the paint to take center stage and definitely not the drawing. There's a lot I want to try to say about that as an approach, but I'm not sure how much is helpful. I just think in general, however you paint, realistically, photorealistically, if you just copy photographs, if you paint purely from invention or even as an abstract painter, always it's your voice that should be the most important. The last thing I want when people look at my paintings is to say, oh, it looks just like a photograph. I get that comment occasionally online, and I know it's meant as a compliment, but it's really painful for me to hear that. Because the last thing I'm trying to do is make my paintings look like a photograph. I'm honestly trying to do the exact opposite of that. So, Florence, like, well, all cities, but gorgeous Italian-age cities like this, they're just a cacophony of shapes and colors and influences for the artists. So what I'm trying to do is pick out one, two, up here on the hill. This is not the famous Duomo of Florence. That's off the frame to the right. This is a smaller but very beautiful church, San Federico, from about 1650-ish. Part of the south bank of the Arno, beautiful, gorgeous neighborhood that it's hard to say it gets overlooked, but it's a little less traveled than the other bank of the Arno where the historic center is. Uffizi Gallery, the Duomo, as I say, etc., etc. They're all over there. The south shore bank of the Arno is a little more comfortable, very beautiful neighborhood. I keep saying I'm never going back to Florence again because it's always so incredibly crowded, but I always do go back and I'm never sorry. It's worth the inconvenience. I'm trying to anchor the drawing here by adding a little hint of this other church. It's not necessarily iconic, but it's just a nice graphic element to anchor what I'm doing here. I'm also, as you might notice, doing no preliminary sketch. That's very rare for me, as I almost always do that. But in terms of painting, this is going to be such a simple and I hope effective approach that I don't think I need one. As light, I'm taking from my cue light in the sky, of course, amber glow I'm going to try to give a nod to, but the main source of light in the painting is going to be the river itself. So I'm going to try to create this literal river of light reading through the painting like this, and all of this will be one big, I'd like to say complicated. I hope it's not complicated in terms of detail, but one big collective shape, which I think will anchor the dark against the light. Again, my instinct is to go in here and draw much more, but I'm going to make myself stop. I think what I want is the simplicity of this big dark shape contrasted with the somewhat more articulated light shape that I'm going to work in over here in the water, etc. So I think the potential success of this painting will rely on the contrast of the simple dark shape and the more articulated light shape, the interrupted light shape. There are lots of bridges across the Arno, so I do apologize. I think this painting will be stronger if I just indicate one in the distance and then the Ponte Vecchio in more of the foreground here. I try to work a bit of light in the river up there. Yes, so color story here is going to be simple, dominantly warm tones. I want yellows and oranges, probably not much, if any, pure saved white. Mostly this light golden, yellow and orange path of light in the sky and river, and then complement that with darker, I'm thinking dark browns, sepia tones here, and yeah, really dominantly warm, and I'll probably articulate some of that darkness, warmth, with a little bit of cool tones dropped in. Don't really know, and honestly, I don't want to know. I want to just figure it out as I go and see how I get on without planning too much. So there will be this crisp, dark edge that will define the light, and then this area and the sky will be very little in terms of edges. In fact, by very little, none at all. All right, so it should work. I think balancing of shapes, the dark, crisper shapes interrupting the light here and here should give a nice diagonal energy to complement the subservient verticals and the dominant horizontals. Okay. Oh, my sketch pencil was a Blackwing 602, my favorite. My eraser is Mono by Tombow. The paper surface I'm working on today is Baohong, Master's Choice Chinese paper, 300 gram or 140 pound, and a rough surface because I really want the texture to read through. So I'm going to try to do most of the painting initially with one large graded wash. This is a Naples yellow. I'm working on a pretty steeply angled surface. I'm going to tilt it up a little to keep this bead from running down over the whole painting. Then I'm grading the yellow into orange. This is a permanent orange by Daniel Smith. And rather than paint in the distant hills, I'm going to try to just wet on a band of violet and let it bleed up into that yellowy gold orange sky. Point being, I don't want a hard edge there at all. Now, I do want to save a little bit of edge here because I want to pop out the light in the hills, in the water, I'm sorry. I'm using one of my brushes, these mops by Neef. This is it's a smallish painting. It's only a quarter sheet, so this is a medium-sized mop. I think it's a 0 or a number 2 at the most. So here, what I want to do is use some reverse gravity. By that I mean I'm tipping the board up to pull some of that violet further up into that gold sky. I'll just monitor it. It's still, of course, extremely wet. And then before it starts to blotch, I'll turn it right side up again. And then if I'm lucky, this should dry into a nice effect where the yellow just becomes the violet and it looks like the distant hills. A little bit of that bead ran up here. I don't love that, but life goes on. I'll live with that. So, this large dark shape I said is going to be browns modified probably with some blues here and there. So I want to do a version of that across the river, but not as dark. So I'm using some burnt sienna and a little bit of sepia just to get sort of a warm brown here to beef up the values to start pulling them forward subtly. Everything as we get closer and closer to us will start to become darker and darker. And I'm just going to leach it down into this distant bridge. Ah yes, the comforting sounds of New York in the background. This might seem rather dark if I want this to look far away, but it's really not. It's very mid-toned. I intend to go quite dark on these shapes before we're done. Not bad. Right. I do want to tint the lower portion of the water, a version of this yellow-orange. So, I hadn't really planned this out that well, so I think I may want to do that now, then glaze over with the darker tones after. Only being a little careful here because I do want to save just a little bit of pure white after all, I think, in the most distant part of the water. I'm bumping this pale yellow glaze up a little into the bridge to create a little bit of sense of reflection. And then I'm going to go into the orange and make, it is darker, but it isn't dark, a brighter surface for the water. Generally okay, but again, to get a crisp edge here, I'm going to have to allow this to dry. So I can't really do all this in one big wash, but what I can do is I don't want a hard edge there. So this is just a moist brush. I'm just gonna knock it into that sky wash before it dries completely. This is some of the darker brown sepia tone I'm going to be using. So yeah, not bad. One concerning thing is this large bead of water here. So I'm going to just take my brush, paper towel, pull out much of the moisture, and then use the dryish ends to just siphon up that bead before it runs or causes me any grief, which we do not need. Dropping little bits of violet in here and there just to give a little depth. I think I'm okay with this shape, and I'm going to just let it dry. This is fine, but this hard edge isn't good because I want all that to look smooth. So before it dries too much, I'll just mist it with my little cheap Holbein mist bottle. Already the orange started to streak a little bit. That's not tragic. I think I can soften that. The transition from yellow to orange to violet is nice, but a little too stark. So the mist bottle will help soften that transition and make those color shifts happen a little more organically. Cool. So, this big dark shape, the bridge, the foreground, even the background, is all going to be done in one wash. But again, I need a harder, crisp edge here, so I'm going to have to either wait for this to dry, but since I'm doing a demonstration for you, I will hasten it with a hairdryer, which I hate to do, but it's fine. Good enough. It's not 100% dry, but close enough. The shine is off. It ought to hold an edge for the most part. I'm pretty happy with the sky and the transition into that hint of distant hills. I like the little bit of white I did save. I think that's sufficient and gives a nice sense of depth. When this becomes very dark, I think that three-dimensional effect will be much more apparent. So I'm going to select a smaller one of these mops. This is a 2.0, I believe. It's very nice point on it, and I'm going to mix up some dark. It's just straight sepia. Now, San Federico here is in the distance, so I don't necessarily want it to be the darkest thing in the painting, but the spire, where it interrupts the sky, definitely wants to be rather dark, but the lower part can soften up a good bit. Is this really what this church looks like? Not exactly, but that's okay. I'm going more for the symbolism of these places rather than photographic authenticity. Again, the edge does need to be crisp and clean, but this big shape really needs to be done all at once. So I have to bear that in mind and work a little less deliberately and a little faster than I might ordinarily do, just to ensure that this all stays nice and juicy and fluid. So I can be a little careful on the edge, that makes sense. But when I get down into the body of this shape, yeah, I have to speed up and loosen up. Dropping a little bit of deep blue into the edge, ultramarine blue. It's obviously a cool complement to that warm, but also a good way to darken. Well, whenever you use complements, warm and cool, you're going to get a neutral or darker tone. So dark brown, dark blue is tried and true. So this rough paper, I'm trying to paint larger shapes fairly quickly so I get some of these sort of dry brush skip marks. One great advantage of rough surface paper, if you're painting urban scenes, for example, is that it looks like you're painting a lot of detail without actually painting any at all, or very little. And that's kind of the look I want. I did want this to be a little darker here. Definitely taking advantage of the gravity of the tilted easel, allowing these somewhat darker and lighter tones to run together organically, while also encouraging the cool and warm tones. I mean, the shift is subtle, but it's definitely there for them to run together in this organic way and do what they're going to do. The little skip marks that you get by painting quickly on this rough paper can make some really interesting effects. You can't really plan them. You sort of just have to notice them when they happen and decide, ask yourself in the moment, does that look good or does that look bad? And generally speaking, my advice is to just let the painting tell you a little bit what it wants and not get in the way too much. Okay, everything's fine up to now. However, I'm not happy with the way this dark shape bleeds into this more mid-tone shape of the distant bridge. I don't want to make that bridge too dark, so I'm just going to try to feather that value out a little. I think that's not bad. I could probably live with that. As the painting proceeds, I may come back and revisit a little. Over there. So we're getting down closer into the foreground elements, so I'm using both more water and more pigment. I'm trying for this effect that this whole shape looks, I don't know the right adjective to use, informative, interesting, varied. Even though it's all one big shape, I want that look, but I don't want it to just look like a solid cutout piece of paper. So I'm trying to get some variations of tone, and here I'm going to try dropping in some cobalt blue and see if that'll add a little additional textural interest. See if that's a good idea or a bad idea. I think not bad. But it was a little dry, so I'll hit it with the water gun, and that'll encourage those complementary tones to run a little better. Okay, here, mixing the sepia with just a little bit of a neutral tint to get even darker. And I don't want to paint the Ponte Vecchio in painstaking detail. Actually, a part of me really does want to, but not for this painting. I want to try to just capture its spirit in this painting. Free, loose, and simple with as few marks as possible. So these openings right in the center span are so iconic. So that to me is the critical move that will tell people looking at this, oh, that's the Ponte Vecchio. Yeah, that works. So I'm really layering on the pigment. This is just straight out of the tube sepia. Very little water. The little bit of drawing I did beforehand, I think, was probably the appropriate amount. You want to be respectful, but I don't want to be too technical or too illustrative. I want it to look kind of magical, and I like paintings where you, as the viewer, have to kind of figure out, like, oh, is that the Ponte Vecchio? Oh yeah, look at that. And anyway, you set up sort of a dialogue with your viewers, where you give them a little puzzle to solve almost. I dropped a little orange in that. Not sure that was a good idea, but I think maybe it was. And a little more cobalt blue here or there, just for a little electricity of that blue-orange. Yeah, I think that's nice. Okay, now I just want to bring this down. I don't want this area to become overly dark, so I'll probably work some lighter warms into that. And this giant bead is dying to go, so rather than tempt fate, I will take, this is some burnt sienna, light or warm. I want this graphic to dominate, and I don't want this left-hand corner to be too heavy. So that's why I dropped in the burnt sienna to lighten it up a little. So this is a mixture of sepia and neutral tints. It's got a little violet in it too. Very little, not much. So this is the most close part of the painting, so there's no real detail at all, but any sort of finesse or specific kind of painting could happen here and nowhere else. So here I'm just trying to imply the beginnings of the reflections or ripples without, again, trying to keep it as absolutely minimal as possible. And that's just pure water. Now here in the foreground, there's a more minor spire of a smaller church, I believe. It's not an iconic visual element, but it's a pretty important anchoring element to the painting. So this is just neutral tint. I don't have black paint, but that's undiluted neutral tint is pretty darn dark. Back to sepia. I want to keep it loose. I don't want too much attention, but it's just there to anchor the bottom of the painting. Using this 1/2 inch flat so I can get some kind of just rough in some architectural type shapes, geometric, so that they don't look too much like trees. This could be mistaken for landscaping, but I want this to look like a more built environment edge there. Okay. Painting isn't done exactly, but I don't want to go much further, honestly. This is the gestural effect I was hoping for, and to hopefully get a sense of the staggered values, darker midtones, lighter midtones, lights, to imply the sense of three-dimensionality, which is pretty much happening. I think I could go a little darker on that corner. But now that these deep darks are established, it's easier for me now to judge how dark I might want to go here. The answer is not very, just a little to pull it away from that landmass. Again, I want to feather these slightly darker tones into the center so that they sort of bleed out, as if the light is kind of leaching out any of the detail. And then here I want no clarity between what's water and land, just to keep it mystical and mysterious. That's better. Not happy about it, but I honestly think this landmass could have just a slightly more defined edge. also better. I think introducing these slightly subtle warm tones here was good because they just look illuminated from the setting sun, whereas this south side of the river looks much more in shadow, which is what I wanted. I think as this dries, I could see articulating up here even a little bit further. But the last thing I want is to go too dark or get into anything that really begins to look like much detail. So I'm going to try to just dry brush in some impressionistic, almost abstract marks. That'll give a little bit of specificity, or I think better said, the idea of specificity. It's not quite dry enough for this yet, so I may have to relate to the Dread hairdryer again just for a moment. One of the trickiest things in painting in watercolor is knowing when you can go back into a wash. You don't always necessarily want it to be 100% dry. Sometimes, although it can be risky, it's very effective to go back into a semi-dry wash. So you'll get some edges that are varied, meaning you'll get some areas that are crisp and defined and other areas that sort of melt into what was there before. I love that effect, but it's hard to plan and it's hard to be confident it's always going to work. This effect is what I want. I just don't want to go too far with it. I want to keep it loosey-goosey and impressionistic. Little bits of hints that there could be something there in the shadows is the effect I want, without actually showing what it is, just implying that there's something there. Turn this up on its side. Many of my architecture professors would be horrified probably that I'm taking so many liberties with so many iconic buildings. But you know, we all change. Yeah, I like this effect, but I think that's enough. I think it's almost too much, so I'm going to soften it a little, keep a little clarity here, and then try to keep this really, really loose on this edge. And as always, try to counsel myself on, when are you done? When are you done with the painting? The actual answer for me is usually about an hour or a half an hour after I should have stopped. I am notorious for overworking paintings that looked pretty good, and then they go from looking pretty good to pretty awful just because I can't leave them alone. But I think I'm not in a danger zone. A little bit of hint of specificity there I think was good. A little bit. But choosing to not put any down here, I think, is equally the way to go. So again, back to my mist bottle, and just let all this run. Back to the burnt sienna, and just drop in some really misty, warm tones. I like the effect, but that's too much, too bright. So a little water will fix all that. And I hadn't really intended to use any violet, but some of it made its way from my palette into this, and I think I like it. So I'm going to use a little bit more over here. Yes, nice effect. Literally just playing in the water now, just to see what effects I can get that help, and knowing all too well I could just easily tip over into the overworked category, so I'm setting off my own alarm bells to stop. So everything's okay. It's pretty much what I was aiming for. I'm hoping this was helpful to you. What I'm trying to demonstrate here is ways of distilling what's really critical from a scene, whether you're painting from a photograph or from real life. It's the same exercise, just feathering that in. Finding, taking a scene like this and saying, I could copy that photo exactly, but would that make a good painting? It might, but my guess is it wouldn't, not necessarily anyway. It would look very rigid. And again, my opinion is, what's the point? If you have a photo, why paint it? So trying to figure out what's the most important thing, what's the second most important thing, setting up a hierarchy that works, hopefully a successful value story, dark, mid-tone, light, and then a workable color story of cools, warms. That's all you need. And the big lesson is, however you paint, if it's very rigid and tight and controlled and technical, or if it's very loose and watery, painting in watercolor, probably painting in any media, it's just an exercise in composing shapes. Shapes of dark, shapes of light, shapes of warm, shapes of cool. Yeah, and I think this is much closer to how I felt when I was standing on that hill looking at this scene than any photograph really captured. So overall, it did what I wanted it to do. I like this idea. I could see doing this at a larger scale where there's really some space for these color effects to run, and I could see experimenting on different kinds of paper as well. But anyway, hope it was helpful. I was happy to paint for you again, and hope to see you all soon.